Incognito mode. Here we go. My 18-year-old stepdaughter is on.
Oh my god, listen, I'm just please don't tell Dad, okay? I'm just trying to save money for school, and
Honestly, I don't remember the last time I came so hard. You just grow up so fast. Can I just see that?
my tongue?
Dana's experience in her online debut offers a deeply resonant exploration of emotional intimacy, self-recognition, and relational complexity within queer women's experiences, emphasizing the interior life and the nuanced processes through which women come to understand their desires, capacities for connection, and the ethical dimensions of closeness. And it does so without reliance on sensationalism or explicit content, instead prioritizing reflective and emotionally grounded storytelling that speaks directly to the layered realities of lesbian and broader LGBTQ+ women's lives. The narrative begins with Dana seizing a moment of privacy and autonomy in her bedroom, a domestic space that becomes a site of exploration, curiosity, and self-directed attention, highlighting the ways in which queer women often navigate personal discovery within the structures and rhythms of everyday life, and emphasizing the importance of safety, control, and self-authored space in cultivating emotional and relational insight. Dana's initial anticipation, mixed with hesitancy, frames her engagement with the online platform as an act of both self-exploration and careful negotiation of desire and identity, reflecting the complex interplay between visibility, self-expression, and social surveillance that characterizes many queer women's experiences in digital and relational spaces. Her discovery of Alina's online presence elicits a profound emotional response, one that combines surprise, curiosity, and the stirrings of admiration, illustrating how queer women frequently encounter their own interior responses to friendship, affection, and attraction in ways that challenge prior assumptions about relational boundaries and identity frameworks, and highlighting the tension between known familiarity and the emerging recognition of desire. This moment also foregrounds the theme of relational negotiation, as Dana's curiosity is tempered by ethical awareness and the recognition that engagement with Alina's online self requires careful consideration of privacy, consent, and relational impact, underscoring how queer women must constantly navigate complex ethical and social landscapes to honor both their own feelings and those of others. The narrative continues to explore the dynamics of disclosure, revelation, and mutual acknowledgement, as Alina becomes aware of Dana's participation and confronts her, offering a scene rich in emotional tension, mutual recognition, and relational clarity. Here, the story emphasizes that queer intimacy often requires the negotiation of hesitation, vulnerability, and honest communication, highlighting how recognition of shared feeling and mutual attraction emerges through dialogue, responsiveness, and ethically guided confrontation, rather than through immediate physicality or coercion. The dialogue between Dana and Alina reflects the subtle, effective processes through which women come to understand the fluidity and multiplicity of desire, illustrating how queer women's identities and relational orientations may encompass multiple dimensions, including emotional, romantic, and ethical orientations, that resist simplistic categorization and demand careful navigation of both internal truth and external perception. This process of mutual acknowledgement is particularly salient for lesbian and queer women, who may often find themselves negotiating cultural pressures to remain legible, respectable, or socially compliant, while simultaneously seeking authentic relational and emotional fulfillment. The story also highlights the ways in which admiration, mentorship, and emotional intensity can operate as socially intelligible forms of closeness and attraction, with Dana's initial awe and supportive praise functioning as vehicles for expressing deep care, recognition, and ethical engagement, allowing queer viewers to identify with the subtleties of relational negotiation and the ways that emotional intimacy can be safely and meaningfully explored. Dana's affirming responses to Alina's online performance emphasize the importance of encouragement, validation, and relational scaffolding in fostering confidence, trust, and ethical engagement within queer relationships, illustrating that love and attraction are as much about emotional attunement and relational responsiveness as they are about overt expression. The scene situates these developments within a domestic and familiar framework, reinforcing the notion that queer relational work often occurs in ordinary spaces and through everyday interactions, and that these microcontexts provide crucial opportunities for recognition, mutual understanding, and the development of relational courage. Dana's internal reflections, mixed with external engagement, foreground the emotional labor inherent in queer relational navigation, highlighting the ongoing negotiation of self-perception, ethical responsibility, and relational responsiveness that characterizes many women-centered relationships, particularly within communities that remain ambivalent or hesitant about acknowledging same-gender attraction. The narrative further addresses the theme of boundary setting and ethical negotiation, as Dana balances curiosity, admiration, and the desire for closeness with respect for privacy and relational safety, demonstrating that queer intimacy is deeply intertwined with the capacity to navigate ethical dilemmas, manage risk, and cultivate trust in relationally and socially complex contexts. Alina's confrontation and Dana's subsequent openness exemplify the processes through which queer women establish relational clarity, articulate desire, and negotiate emotional connection in ways that are mutually respectful and grounded in awareness of one another's experiences, illustrating how ethical attention and relational attunement are central to the development of meaningful queer intimacy. This dynamic also reflects the broader social pressures that shape women's expression of affection and desire, including the persistent cultural ambivalence toward lesbian intimacy, the expectation that women maintain relational propriety, and the need to navigate visibility without triggering surveillance, judgment, or marginalization. By depicting Dana's careful engagement with her desires, her thoughtful negotiation of visibility, and her ethical responsiveness to Alina's presence, the film emphasizes that queer relationality is an ongoing, reflective practice, one that combines self-awareness, ethical mindfulness, and responsive engagement to cultivate trust, recognition, and connection. Furthermore, the narrative emphasizes the importance of mutual affirmation, as Dana's supportive and admiring responses enable Alina to experience recognition and validation in ways that are emotionally resonant and ethically safe, highlighting that relational, confidence, and emotional self-actualization are often co-constructed and dependent upon attentive, reflective engagement. The story thus underscores the ways in which queer women's emotional and relational lives are shaped by an interplay of interior reflection, relational negotiation, and ethical attention, and how these dynamics facilitate the development of intimacy, self-confidence, and mutual recognition, particularly in contexts where cultural and social frameworks may be ambivalent, surveillant, or minimally supportive. Dana's recognition of Alina's talents, her willingness to acknowledge and engage with desire in a reflective and ethically attuned manner, and her careful balancing of admiration, curiosity, and relational respect, collectively illustrate the broader mechanisms through which lesbian and queer women cultivate relational resilience, ethical attention, and emotionally grounded intimacy, reinforcing the notion that queer relationality is characterized by negotiation, ethical scaffolding, and co-constructed emotional work rather than by unmediated or spontaneous expression. This emphasis on reflective and ethically guided engagement also resonates with women of all orientations, as it highlights the universal importance of acknowledging internal desire, articulating needs, and cultivating relational trust while balancing personal boundaries, social expectations, and interpersonal ethics. The narrative further critiques the ways in which cultural frameworks often erase, sensationalize, or problematize women's same-gender intimacy, instead privileging ethical nuance, emotional resonance, and relational authenticity as central values, thereby offering a counter-narrative to depictions that reduce queer relationality to spectacle, taboo, or performative display. The domestic and familiar setting reinforces the ordinariness of these complex relational negotiations, suggesting that profound emotional work frequently occurs in the quiet, everyday spaces of life, rather than through heightened drama or spectacle, and emphasizing that intimacy, trust, and relational courage are cultivated incrementally through reflection, dialogue, and ethical presence. Dana's hesitancy, careful observation, and internal processing illustrate the ways in which queer women continuously calibrate their responses to desire, attraction, and relational opportunity, reflecting the broader pressures of social surveillance, internalized expectation, and ethical awareness that shape women-centered relational worlds. The story also emphasizes that emotional risk-taking, self-recognition, and relational trust are mutually reinforcing, as Dana's courage to acknowledge her admiration, curiosity, and emotional response creates the conditions for Alina's own recognition and affirmation, highlighting the co-constructed nature of queer intimacy and the ethical scaffolding that supports it. By presenting Dana's engagement as thoughtful, deliberate, and ethically guided, the narrative foregrounds the role of interior reflection, relational ethics, and attentiveness in cultivating trust, connection, and mutual recognition, offering a nuanced depiction of queer women's experiences that prioritizes psychological depth, emotional subtlety, and the co-construction of relational spaces. This focus on ethical engagement, interiority, and careful negotiation also allows the film to address themes of longing, repression, emotional labor, and the cultivation of authenticity in ways that resonate across queer and broader women's experiences, highlighting the centrality of relational vigilance, self-awareness, and ethical responsibility in sustaining meaningful connections. The mutual recognition between Dana and Alina, framed through dialogue, reflection, and ethically mediated response, functions as a model for understanding queer relationality as a deliberate, co-constructed process, illustrating that intimacy is both an achievement of trust and a practice of attentive engagement rather than a spontaneous or purely instinctual occurrence. Through this lens, the narrative demonstrates that queer women's relational experiences are characterized by negotiation, affirmation, and ethical co-creation, emphasizing that the cultivation of intimacy, emotional trust, and relational resilience relies on patience, reflection, and careful attunement to both self and other. The story further situates these processes within the broader social context of cultural ambivalence, surveillance, and the erasure or sensationalization of lesbian intimacy, reinforcing the importance of presenting queer relationality as ethically grounded, emotionally resonant, and narratively meaningful rather than as spectacle or taboo. Dana's internal and external negotiations, her careful attention to ethics, desire, and relational recognition, and her responsiveness to Alina's presence collectively illustrate the multi-layered, reflective, and ethically attuned nature of queer emotional life, demonstrating that meaningful intimacy is co-constructed, contextually negotiated, and rooted in mutual trust, affirmation, and careful attention to boundaries. The narrative thereby contributes to a broader understanding of queer relational practice, emphasizing that lesbian and queer women cultivate intimacy, confidence, and self-recognition through thoughtful, ethically grounded engagement, and that these processes are deeply reflective, relationally mediated, and culturally situated. In centering interiority, ethical negotiation, and relational responsiveness, her online debut presents a thoughtful, emotionally grounded, and socially resonant exploration of queer intimacy, highlighting the cumulative, reflective, and ethically rich work that women engage in to foster trust, affirmation, and mutual recognition, and emphasizing that the emotional landscapes of queer women are complex, nuanced, and deserving of serious and respectful narrative attention. The story's focus on relational mentorship, affirmation, and mutual recognition illustrates the ways in which queer women cultivate confidence, resilience, and ethical engagement in relationships, offering viewers a model for understanding the delicate balance of visibility, desire, and ethical responsibility that shapes meaningful intimacy. By presenting Dana and Alina's relational development as deliberate, reflective, and ethically attentive, the film foregrounds the importance of interiority, co-constructed trust, and emotional recognition as central to queer women's experiences, providing audiences with a nuanced, ethically rich, and emotionally resonant depiction of the processes through which women come to know themselves, navigate desire, and build intimate relationships in a world that frequently misunderstands, erases, or sensationalizes their connections, and in doing so, asserts the significance of ethical, emotionally grounded representation for the recognition, resilience, and visibility of women-centered queer relational life.